Hello everyone, welcome to version 1.1 of my Uncharted 2 Brutal Difficulty walkthrough. This will cover chapters 1 through 4, and I hate having to do this commentary again. And yes, guys, I'm having to do the commentary again because Share Factory fucked me. You know, that same issue I discussed where you split a clip and then you try to trim it and Share Factory just bricks entirely. And correction, it's not just when you use the split clip function and then you use the trim clip function for Share Factory. It's just in general, when you use the trim clip function, it just bricks your entire application. It bricks Share Factory entirely, and this has been an issue for months now, and Sony has done nothing to fix it. So I was almost done with this commentary for this video, and then I tried to trim something because I completely forgot about this issue, and it just happened to me. So retarded on so many levels. But negativity aside, there's nothing to really explain with chapters 1 and 2 of Uncharted 2 because there's not much gameplay to them. Chapter 1 is just one enemy, and then chapter 2 is just nothing but stealth. And it's such a slap to the face when they're introducing the stealth system in Uncharted 2, right? And the stealth on this game has been updated from Uncharted 1. Yet, a vast majority of the stealth sequences in Uncharted 2 cannot be done stealthily because the stealth only exists to complement the combat. And what I mean is, when you try to go to a specific part of the area, or you happen to kill a certain enemy in a particular way, the game will just force combat down your throat. Like, the enemies will just know where you are. Enemies will just spawn out of the blue. Like, the game is trying to give the impression that it wants you to stealth, but then at the end, it doesn't want you to stealth because it just forces combat down your throat. Like, what the fuck is that? That is so retarded. Like, that's the one thing I've never understood with Uncharted 2 and 3. And it's at least something they went away from with Uncharted 4. Uncharted 4, any stealth sequence can be done stealthily. There's no forced combat bullshit, this and that. Although in certain cases it's better to do like combat takedowns at the end of certain stealth sequences in Uncharted 4. But overall, like, you can do stealth in Uncharted 4. You can get through encounters without having to kill enemies. Yet in Uncharted 2 and 3, you can't do that. And very rarely will you get sequences where you can do true stealth. And Uncharted 2 is rife with sequences like that. Same with Uncharted 3. But moving past that, coming to Uncharted 2 on Brutal Difficulty after playing Uncharted 1 on Brutal Difficulty definitely feels like a breath of fresh air because Uncharted 2 is a significantly better game than Uncharted 1. I mean, story-wise, I don't think the story of the Chintamani Stone is as interesting as Sir Francis Drake's storylines. I feel like the story of the Uncharted games in the trilogy feels better when it's about Sir Francis Drake. That's why Uncharted 3's story feels more interesting than Uncharted 2's story. But just focusing on the gameplay, Uncharted 2's gameplay is miles better than Uncharted 1's gameplay, even though the flinch animations for the enemies aren't that good in Uncharted 2 compared to Uncharted 1's flinch animations, but at least the enemies don't spam dodge like crazy. At least the enemies don't do this really janky looking animation where they step out of cover and then immediately go back into cover just to shoot you, rather than doing a dedicated animation for peeking out of cover, shooting, and then going back into cover, like the enemies do on this game. And also this right here, the blind fire in Uncharted 2 is incredible. The blind fire is so accurate, it actually makes a lot of sense. The range at which Nate doesn't miss his shots makes so much sense. Yet in Uncharted 1 with the blind fire, Nate could miss his shots at distances that didn't make any sense. Even if the enemies were so close to him, he just misses his shots for no reason because the blind fire isn't programmed very well in Uncharted 1. The blind fire is properly programmed in Uncharted 2. And the blind fire in Uncharted 3, it's probably the same as in Uncharted 2, but the enemies in Uncharted 3 don't flinch whatsoever. Their flinch animations are very inconsistent because the whole programming involved where the enemies have to run around and actually go between cover, this and that, it supersedes the programming on their flinch animations. So that's why the enemies barely flinch in that game. And even when they were shooting at you, if you tried shooting them, they just didn't flinch a lot of the times. Like, the animations were so broken in Uncharted 3, it's not even funny. But regardless, the blind fire in these games after Uncharted 1 is significantly improved. Even in Uncharted 4, the blind fire is pretty good. But I would say the guns in Uncharted 1, some of them feel better than the guns in Uncharted 2. Like, the M92F in Uncharted 1 feels better than the M92F in Uncharted 2. And also, the shotguns in Uncharted 1 feel a lot better than the shotguns in Uncharted 2, because the shotguns were very damaging, even at range, in Uncharted 1. Whereas in Uncharted 2, at the ranges where the shotgun would instantly kill enemies in Uncharted 1, in Uncharted 2, the shotguns would never really kill enemies at that range. It's disappointing, but at least the whole ability for the blind fire on the shotgun to be useful for knocking grenades out of enemies' hands, at least that is still very useful. But you know the one thing that separates Uncharted 2 from Uncharted 1 gameplay-wise in a very positive format? The last known position mechanic. And I'll explain it for this sequence. But right now, after you deal with those two spawns, you'll want to pick up the west before you trigger this spawn right here. There are two arbitrary spawns for this sequence. The first spawn happens when you go down into the water after you kill the first couple of enemies, and then the second spawn occurs here when you get near this cover. And with the west pistol, I'm going to use the blind fire to my advantage to stop any enemies from rushing me. And also, you'll see me demonstrate the last known position mechanic on this game, which is the first Uncharted game to have this. So, in Uncharted 1, the enemies knew exactly where you were at all times. They could be distracted by your AI partners, but overall, they knew exactly where you were, even when you broke line of sight and you were in cover. Well, here, they made the gameplay a lot more believable realistically, in the sense that the moment you break line of sight, you've generated a last known position, and this can include moving away from an area, or just simply going into cover. Simply going into cover because the enemies cannot see you allows you to generate a last known position, and while the enemies are busy prioritizing your last known position, you can move to a different spot and get an angle on the enemies. Or better yet, you can wait until the enemies stop firing and they're just busy like peeking out of cover or just searching an area, and you can use this in order to get sneak attacks on the enemies, but not melee sneak attacks, because melee sneak attacks when you're still in a stealth/combat status, like when you're in between a stealth and combat status, it's very dangerous to do. Which is why you'll want to simply shoot the enemies when you're in that middle state between stealth and combat. That's what I mean with the last known position mechanic on this game, because the enemies, they don't really behave in a traditional last known position sense. You know, you'd expect them to go into very unique animations of just simply searching an area, but they'll just remain with their guns drawn, and they'll be doing these very weird movement animations where they're still like moving in a direction, but at the same time they're not moving their bodies to face that direction. They're facing back towards your last known position and just moving in very strange ways, and this can be a little bit weird, but at the same time still very advantageous. And if you know how to bypass these issues, if you know how to work around it, you're going to have no troubles whatsoever. As I'll demonstrate in a moment with the beginning of this sequence, this is where Chapter 4, The Dig, begins. And Chapter 4, The Dig, is the trial by fire to see if you can do this difficulty. The Dig is probably the hardest chapter in the game, as Serpent17 described, and I would agree with him on that. And compared to my original walkthrough, I was able to get the sequence done on the first try, the first time I started Chapter 4. I did not need to restart the entire chapter. I just got into Chapter 4 the very first time, and I was able to do the sequence on the very first try. But at least this time, I won't make the same mistake like I did in my original walkthrough and forget the West pistol. Make sure you pick up the West pistol before this cutscene triggers. That way, when you get the checkpoint, you don't have to waste time getting the West pistol, and you will be able to remain in a last known position state right here. But the game's going to introduce you to grenades, so follow the tutorial. It'll only do this the very first time, but when you hit L1 again, it's going to do a double throw on the grenades, and then right here, just use the rest of your grenades to clear out the stragglers, pick up the rest of the grenades right here, and then the enemies have spawned in, so I'm just going to use the cover transition, and I'm just going to generate a last known position. When you do that cover transition animation, where you're going between cover, the enemies cannot see you. The cover transition mechanic overall is just a brand new mechanic introduced with Uncharted 2 for the series. And Uncharted 1 kinda had a cover transition mechanic, but it was not very good. I mean, Nate could still do the same animation like what he does in Uncharted 2, but only if the cover he was at was very close to the cover he was going towards. In place of an actually meaningful cover transition animation, what Uncharted 1 would do is it would make Nate roll out of cover, and the distance he would cover with his roll would match the distance between the cover you're at and the cover he's rolling towards. So that's why a lot of times his rolls made it look like he was gliding, but also the enemies could shoot him while he was rolling, because that's just a general thing in all the Uncharted games. You could just be shot while rolling all the time in the Uncharted series. But here, they actually made a dedicated cover transition mechanic when the distance between your cover and another cover is a little bit longer compared to how it is in Uncharted 1. And the cover transition mechanic on this game helps complement the last alone position because you can't be seen while you're doing the cover transition. And this is helpful because if you do generate a last alone position and you want to move around the area, but there's like open spaces in between the cover, you can just do that mechanic and the enemies cannot see you. And this is so beneficial for the guerrilla tactics aspect for this game. And it makes this game so much more fun when it comes to creativity within the combat. And it's such a shame this doesn't work in Uncharted 3, because in Uncharted 3, the enemies can see you when you're doing the cover transition. So you had to be more careful in Uncharted 3, and you couldn't be as creative with your strategies, in my opinion. But maybe I'll think differently when I do that walkthrough of Uncharted 3. But I used the last alone position mechanic when I first started the sequence, after I used all those grenades, because I made sure to remain in cover, and I exited the shed, and the enemies still couldn't see me, so the enemies were investigating my last alone position, and during that time, Sully was shooting them. And when he shoots his sniper rifle, and Sully's very active in shooting in this situation right here compared to the AI in general throughout the rest of the Uncharted series, minus Uncharted 4, Sully allows you to remain in cover in a stealth profile while at the same time he's dealing with the enemies. So it's almost like Sully is firing a silent sniper rifle. And so after I get rid of that spawn, or rather Sully gets rid of that spawn, the middle spawn occurs, and that's when I need to deal with the enemies when they're in cover. And if they try to flank around the left, I need to deal with them accordingly. But the problem is, when you're in this cover spot, Nate can do this animation where he does fire to the side, or like he can fire like above the cover, and it hits enemies on the left. But because there is this slight change in the elevation in the cover right here, because this wall is slightly elevated above the cover, Nate can sometimes blind fire into this piece of cover, and it prevents you from actually dealing with enemies that flank to the side. And also, when this spawn occurs right here, where the enemies are coming from that waterfall over there, the enemies can sometimes go around to the right. And if they go around to the right like this guy is doing right here, they can go up on the scaffolding and actually get the drop on me. So I have to pay attention to the right-hand side while I'm busy dealing with these enemies. And also, after you kill a certain number of enemies for this sequence, when there's only like 2 enemies left in this spawn right here, enemies will spawn in, and they will prioritize Sully. And you have to kill the enemies before they kill Sully. That's what happens with that particular spawn. But right here, these guys are not moving up, because I'm guessing my last alone position is preventing them from actually going up. But I kill that guy, and I'm checking the right-hand side, and nothing's happening right now. But maybe they're not pushing up because this guy is still alive right here. Because the moment I kill this guy, these enemies decide to flank me, and they decide to go up on the scaffolding. I mean, one guy does, but I'm able to take him out. This happened in my original walkthrough as well, and I was at least prepared for it. Like, in my original walkthrough, I wasn't prepared for the possibility of enemies actually going to the right-hand side, and when it happened, it was definitely quite tense. But he's dead, and one of these guys is going to climb the scaffolding right here. And the moment he climbs up, I'm going to hide behind this wall over here and just wait for him to get to a position where I can use the aiming right here, because I can kind of use the third-person cover trick like that. And then this guy, he's done. And right now, the enemies are attacking Sully, and I should use the time to get some resources, but I wasn't entirely sure how long it takes the enemies to kill Sully in the sequence, so that's why I prioritized them to increase Sully's chances of staying alive before picking up some more ammo. So these guys are coming right now, so I'm just picking up some more AK-47 ammo. The AK-47 is definitely needed, because the blind fire is going to help with dealing with the rest of the enemies that spawn. Right now, these guys are dealing with Sully, so I'm just going to use the West pistol. And I'm just going to go back into cover right here before I decide to kill the last enemy. I mean, Sully kills him right here, but good thing I was in this spot right here, because the middle spawn is about to occur again. And these guys are coming right now. So I at least have a couple of grenades. I have the West pistol. I'm set for the rest of the sequence. But you gotta pay attention to the number of enemies you kill, because at a certain point, when you kill the right amount of enemies, the guy in the tower is going to spawn. And you can throw a grenade into the tower from this position right here. However, I believe the guy in the tower can shoot you, but a lot of the times he chooses not to. But I'm almost certain I had one moment in my earlier playthroughs of this game where I've been shot by that guy while I'm in this spot. It didn't happen right here. Like, I was able to get this whole entire sequence done, without having to restart the chapter. I managed to get the sequence done the moment I started chapter 4 for the very first time, and it was glorious. But the tower's gone, and now I just have to finish off the stragglers. And after you do this combat encounter, there's no point in picking up more ammunition because you're going to lose your weapons. And then you have to do this really shitty, badly designed chase sequence for brutal difficulty for this game. Almost reminiscent to Chapter 7 of Uncharted 1 on brutal difficulty, where you're just at the mercy of the game. It's complete RNG, it's random, there's no sense of control involved. How this is serviceable for a difficulty, I don't know. But at least found some kind of consistent strategy that works very well. So drop down, you have to drop down, not jump, then you have to go into cover, mantle, and then just run into this corner. This is important if you have very low health before this part right here, because for some reason this guy, he struggles with actually killing you when you're running into this corner right here. He's missing all of his subsequent shots, and he's gonna throw a grenade, and this allows me to have enough health to survive the next barrage of bullets in order to get here, because the enemies cannot kill me when I'm in this spot right here, as long as I'm moving. And that's done. And I have 2 minutes of bloopers right here. This is the 2 minutes of bloopers dedicated to the sequence to showcase how fucking retarded the developers were with not balancing the sequence around normal or crushing difficulty. Like, how the fuck can you call this serviceable for a fucking difficulty? And how is the average person supposed to even do what I just did in order to survive this sequence? Like, when you have to resort to gaming the system, when you have to resort to holes in the design, when you have to resort to the weirdest methods possible to make something serviceable for a higher difficulty, you have done fucked up right here. And right here, that is a huge problem. If you get pulled into the melee on this game, you have no chance of escaping. The only possible way you're going to exit the melee combat is to kill the guy you're dealing with. You cannot leave. It's physically impossible, because you try to recover from the animation, you just try to wait it out and maybe just mash the roll button, but you can't. It's a paired animation system, so it forces you into it. There is no sort of way to get out of the melee on this game. And when you have to put this guy right here on all difficulties, even brutal difficulty, and he's getting in the way of you trying to get away from these enemies. You think this is how a normal person acts when they're trying to run away from enemies and they have a guy right in front of them? You think that's how that works? At least in Uncharted Golden Abyss, when you're in this kind of chase sequence, they made it where you could instantly kill the guys that were in front of you with melee attacks. Here, you can't. The only possible way you're going to instantly kill this guy with a melee attack is if you somehow position yourself so that you're slightly elevated above him, or you're slightly below him, so that you're more likely to trigger the instant kill melee attack. But the detection on it is shit. This is not something indicative of a AAA developer. This is something an amateur would do. I mean, look at that. Did you see any possible way for me to survive that? Like, it's all completely random. It's all completely random. Unless you do exactly what I do. Like, why does it have to be that rigid? Why does it have to be so weird? I don't fucking understand. And what do you bet some deluded individual is going to be like, oh, it's a game, so those kind of strategies where you're doing the weirdest motions ever, they're perfectly serviceable for the game. They're perfectly serviceable for the difficulty. That's just the developer's way of actually using poor designs to make you find something like it's intentional. Like, how do you respond to that? How do you respond to these kind of people? I've heard these kind of comments before on my videos. Like, are you even human when you make these kind of comments? Do you have no sense of common sense? Do you even have a fucking education? Because that's what it seems like with these people that designed this sequence and a lot of the other sequences in Uncharted 1 for brutal difficulty. But that's all I have to say right there. This is the end of chapters 1 through 4. Stay tuned for the future chapters. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.